telling me, I can deliver that with the waterfront. I may have to do that. That's what I'm saying back there. I started the comp I developed yesterday, but it's getting better today, but I'm still.
Good evening, everyone. Morning. That's good. Very good. Always a smart aleck in the crowd, isn't there? It's a real honor to be here. My name is Vince Coakley. I am the Republican candidate for North Carolina's 12th district. I am running for the House, but tonight, this is not about the House. This is about the U.S. Senate, a very important race. And we, of course, are here to hear from them. And we hope the questions and answers will help you decide who should be the Republican nominee to take on Democrat Senator Kay Hagan this November. I want to give you some information on the background of this debate tonight. This, of course, is a candidate forum sponsored by the Cabarrus, Rowan, and Davidson County Tea Parties. And tonight's questions have been submitted by members of these groups, and I've also added some questions of my own. If time permits as well, we may also allow some questions from the audience. Tonight's questions, we will begin by asking each of the candidates to introduce themselves and to explain why it is they should be the nominee. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer a question. Here at the beginning, I will give each of you 4 minutes to introduce yourselves and explain why you are running. What makes you uniquely and most qualified to be our next U.S. Senator? So with that, we will start over on this end with Mr. Jim Snyder, and you can begin by taking the floor.
Should we sit or stand?
Oh, you can sit.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jim Snyder from Lexington, just across the river. I've been a Republican all my life, as was my father, and a conservative all my life. I came into this race a bit late. As I said, along the trail, I was a little under the weather last year, doing fine now. Was really not fit and ready to go. And was up at the Baptist Hospital in Winston-Salem after surgery, and all I could do was think about my country and think that if I got out of that to bed, then I would do the best I could to file for Senate and do what I could. 2 weeks fortuitously after I filed, a public policy poll came out, and I know polls are polls and they vary, but I was very heartened to see that if we were to be compared with Kay Hagan, out of the 8 candidates, 2 of us would beat her, and I would beat her about 44 to 43. And that may have changed around from time to time, to be fair with you, but it was still remarkable to me that my past as a candidate for lieutenant governor under the Republican aegis and conservative aegis with Patrick Valentine, we finished close to Beverly Perdue. Before then, I'd run with Elizabeth Dole. When I ran with Elizabeth Dole, I cajoled her and the president to eschew, to go against the North American Free Trade Agreement. When I go to the office every day and cross a railroad track that comes down to Salisbury, I look to my left, and there are 16 acres of empty, vacuous factories that went out of this country faster than sand through a sieve, leaving 5,000 jobs in Lexington, or about 5,000 gone. You know who did that to us? Our Congress. I've always been a defender of Congress until recently. Republicans and Democrats did that. If Jim Snyder had won against Elizabeth Dole, and we came in second years ago, and had folks like us and me there, I will assure you that the North American Free Trade Agreement would not have been passed. And then what did the Congress do in 2008? They were asleep in the hen house when the foxes got in the names of corporate CEOs of banks who used credit default swaps and derivatives, and they gambled with those, and our country almost went on her knees again. When you lose your economic base, your manufacturing base, and your banks, what's next? You don't have money to pay for your military. How do you protect the military unless you have immense sums of money? Another issue that has been hard on my heart, particularly when I was at Wake Forest Baptist, and I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but I'm just going to tell you where I feel. We have a nation, and some people in this country, I hear over 50%, who think that it's okay to waterboard our enemies. They're so bad and evil that the torture or rendition is okay. And it's okay to assassinate people with drones because these people are out to get us, and this is a different time. I guess it's worse than when the Nazis were after us. Worse, I guess, than when the Russians were after us. I just cannot understand that. What is our country coming to? Time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope to have your support after this is over. Thank you.
I can't see on this side over here. I got somebody next to me a little taller. My name is Greg Brandon. Yes, I'm running for the United States Senate. I believe what's crucial right now is constitutional leadership. We have definitely lost that mooring, those foundational principles. Whatever issue we talk about tonight, it's all going to go back to, is it an Article 1, Section 8? Is it the idea of federalism, the idea of the Constitutional Article 6, Clause 2? It is, that contract is really simple. It was written 6 pages, and the Bill of Rights is 1 page. We talk about Obamacare, which I happen to read the whole bill. Dodd-Frank, which I read the whole bill. All these powers are usurped by Congress, or executive orders, or judicial activists. So what we're looking for now, I believe, is to get the clear understanding of what that contract really means. It led me to ask myself 2 questions. Who is sovereign, and what is the legitimate role of a government? And both those are answered in the 2nd paragraph of our declaration. The Creator made us in His image. So we're sovereign here, based upon those innate rights He gave us, life. And this to me is one of the most crucial reasons why I run, from the moment of conception to natural passing. I'm an OBGYN, I've delivered around 9,000 babies. I understand that life is precious the moment God makes it occur, all the way to natural passing. There is no such thing as quality of life, it's all perfect. And then liberty, with its freedom and responsibilities and the pursuit of your happiness. The very next sentence answers the very next question. What is truly the legitimate role of government? It says to secure those rights, a government instituted amongst men, driving their just powers for consent to the governed. So the sovereign, look in the mirror, that's you, is giving your consent to have unbiased umpires. Unbiased umpires have the equal opportunity beginning. And the moment a government oversteps those bounds, it's tyranny. And Jefferson listed 20 things called tyranny. Again, the Constitution, in 6 pages, limits the federal government to what it can and cannot do. It restricts them, not the individual. And the Bill of Rights does not grant a right, it declares God-given natural rights in which the federal government cannot infringe upon. When they attack the 2nd Amendment or the 4th Amendment, the 9th Amendment, that is an infringement on their power. But what has to hold them accountable is the state legislators and the ambassadors, the Senate and the Congress, to hold that whole contract together. So what we need to do, is, I believe, is to get men and women who understand that, because you cannot leave if you do not know that contract. It comes down to that and that only. I believe we're prepared for that. We're the only candidate in the country, backed by Senator Paul, Senator Lee, Freedom Works, Matt Kibbe, Gun Owners of America, National Association of Gun Rights, Eric Erickson, my church, Thomas Woods, and Coulter. We're putting together a coalition of true constitutional liberty lovers. I believe we do that. We can change the next 30, 40 years the best we ever seen.
Amen.
I'm Ted Alexander, and I'm running for U.S. Senate to be your public servant. I love North Carolina. I love our country. I was born and raised here. I was born in Morganton, and I've lived in Shelby the last 25 years. For 2 months in a row now, the public policy polling has indicated that I would be the most likely candidate to beat Kate Hagan come November. It hurts my heart whenever I see the way that our country is right now. I'm 53 years old. I've never seen the situation that we face right now. With Obamacare, basically has taken over 1/6 of our economy. 470,000 people in North Carolina alone have lost their health insurance. We have a situation where our budget and our deficits and debt are at high levels and numbers we can't even imagine. We absolutely need to repeal Obamacare, and we need to have a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution, as well as a line item veto as well. We need the penny plan, I believe, in order to get us there in the next couple of years, because it will take a few years to get there. I believe that we are facing now a military. Our president proposes a military that will give us the weakest military that we've seen since pre-World War II days. We have an attorney general, basically, that tells us he's not going to enforce the laws that he doesn't like, and that we don't need to enforce the laws we don't like. And then we have a vice president. And you know, he says basically, you don't have to work, that we'll take care of. This is not the America I know. When people of Judeo-Christian beliefs, Christians like myself, are told basically that our opinions are not welcome, that somehow or another that we are haters because of this, or that we're not entitled to have an opinion because we may be pro-life, or that we may be pro-traditional marriage. You have a choice to make come May the 6th. And my hope is, and my request to you is for your vote, because I have the trust, the experience, and the determination to go to Washington, to roll up my sleeves, to do the hard work that has to be done. When I served as mayor of Shelby for 2 terms, and I term limited myself, there were 2 things that I said that I would work on. I said that we would work on the crime situation. We were the 2nd or 3rd highest level crime rate in the city of our size in North Carolina. And I did just that. It would have been higher, our crime rate would have been higher actually, but our criminals were pretty bad shots. They didn't have very good aim. The second, by the time I left mayor, we were at a 30-year low in terms of our crime. I told people we would work on jobs and economic opportunity because we had a stagnant economy based on the fact that NAFTA had basically devastated our textile industry. And I assiduously worked on that as well. So by the time I left, we had recruited many, many businesses. I'm asking for your vote on May the 6th because I would have the trust, the experience, and the determination to go to Washington to get the job done. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Heather Grant, and I'm one of the United States Senate candidates. Thank you for having us here this evening. I want to tell you what a pleasure it is to get to come out here and be with all of y'all, and it has been such an honor to travel down this road with these gentlemen. People ask me why I decided to get into this race, and as I tell you about myself, you're going to understand why I'm in this race and why I believe I'm the person who needs to be your next United States Senator from North Carolina. I grew up here locally. I graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in Nursing degree from Winston-Salem State University and joined the United States Army Nurse Corps. And while I was in the Army, I was injured. Now, I thought my life was over, and God reached down and touched me and said, "No, ma'am, it is not. I'm about to do something for you that you will never forget." And He is right, because while I was in the military, my last job was to take care of men and women who came back from Iraq and Afghanistan who needed behavioral health help back at their home of record. Now, you would think that our government would want these men and women to come back and be able to lead normal lives, and that they would want to help them. I'm here to tell you, they don't. I fought every day for 26 months to do the right thing by these men and women who had signed on the dotted line and offered up their lives to protect our freedoms here. And what I learned is that they love the idea of perception. Looks great on paper today, don't care about the reality tomorrow, as long as the next higher up doesn't find out about reality. I did everything I could for those soldiers, and I am thankful I had that opportunity. I came home, I took off my uniform, and I thought, government is out of my back pocket. I was so excited. I was wrong. I got a wake-up call. They want to take my freedom of speech. They want to take my guns because I'm a veteran and because I'm disabled. They want to tell me that I have to purchase insurance. Now, as a provider, they want to tell me how best to take care of my patients and how best to teach my children. This has to stop. The way this stops is by laying a foundation and sending citizen legislators to Washington. By laying a foundation that conservative people will come behind me. Not just me, but the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Why? Because we mentor and we help each other, and we lay a foundation that we never get back to where we are today. Because we all know if you spend more money than you take in, eventually it all runs out. We know that we as a country are a credit risk today. We know that our government, our federal government, has stepped outside its 18 enumerated powers, and that's why it thinks it can interfere in our daily lives. We know that jobs in our economy are the most important thing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I think you should think about voting for me on May 6th and pray about it. And I hope that we're able to answer your questions here this evening. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Mark Harris, and it is indeed a pleasure to be back in Rowan County and to see so many familiar faces and folks that have become great friends over these days together. I'm in this race because I recognized that we are facing in our day probably the greatest crisis of leadership in Washington, D.C. that we have seen in our modern history. You and I need to recognize that today that we need new leadership, and we need folks that will stand with character, folks that will stand with consistency, and folks that will stand with courage. I was born and raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I had the pleasure of graduating from Reynolds High School and heading to Appalachian State University, where I majored in political science and actually headed to law school. Took the LSAT my final year at Appalachian, and I'd fallen in love with a girl named Beth, who this June will have been my wife 27 years. And it was fascinating because accepted to Campbell University School of Law in February, getting married in June, and was to start law school in August. 2 weeks before my wedding and 2 months before I was to start law school, God called me to preach. And for the last 27 years, I've been serving in ministry, servant leadership to individuals, walking through life with people during their good times and during their most challenging times as well. You know, it's fascinating because after 25 years of ministry, I've stopped and thought about when I stepped into the pulpit at Center Grove Baptist Church in Clemens, North Carolina, at the ripe old age of 22 for the first time. And I think about the issues that we faced then. And I think about the last 9 years being pastor of First Baptist Church of Charlotte, the issues that people face now. And you know what I realized? Is that the same concerns we had then are the concerns we have today. But they have just ratcheted up a notch. You see, people today are concerned about the sluggish economy. They're concerned about the eroding values we have in our culture. They're concerned about a federal government that's become more intrusive than it was ever intended to be. And they're concerned, perhaps most of all, that we've got elected leaders in Washington, D.C. who just no longer seem to care. I got in this race because I do care. I care about your family. I care about my family. I've spent the last 25 years of my life caring about people. And you see, I care about this state and I care about this nation. As a 14-year-old, I had the privilege of working in the Americans for Reagan office, stuffing envelopes, making phone calls, and as a result of that, I had the privilege of going to the inauguration as a 14-year-old. One of the things that I think about even today, the things that were planted in my mind that Ronald Reagan taught all of us. He said, building a strong America is just like building a three-legged stool. You must build it with a strong domestic agenda, a strong foreign policy, and strong traditional values. And he said if you ever try to break or weaken one of those three legs, that stool cannot stand. I hope tonight we'll have a few minutes to talk about those issues that make up those three legs. God bless you.
Candidates have addressed this particular issue. Since it's the elephant in the room, I think it's best that we start here on the subject of Obamacare. And the question is, there's pretty much universal agreement among conservatives that Obamacare needs to be repealed. If that indeed does happen, what solutions do you propose to address the problems, the current problems, in our healthcare system? We'll begin this time with Dr. Grant.
The problem with Obamacare, first off, is it is unconstitutional. In Article 1, Section 8 is not there. When Senator Cruz talked about how you get rid of it, the first thing is defund anything that is unconstitutional. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1. That is really showing the demarcation. You understand the Constitution, there's not. Now the question is, where's the government role in health care? I'm an OBGYN, as I talked before. I've dealt with health care 26 years. I know Ms. Grant has well for about 8-10 years. Doing this healthcare aspect of it, it's not even as a physician that bothers me, it's as a citizen it bothers me, because the governments get involved in the most intimate relationship they could have. That's unacceptable. So what is the actual plan? You go back to the actual origin of the plan. It was October 26, 1943. FDR froze wages. So to get better employees, In the competition of that, governments, because an IRS statute passed, got benefits if they gave, tax benefits if they gave health benefits to their employees. The government got involved in something they do not belong. That got bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Medicaid, their projection, the numbers, they were off by 913%. Medicare, they're off by 1,700%. I wrote a paper on this in 2010, and if you actually score Obamacare the way it is, they scored Hillary Care, it would not be $1 trillion, but $7 trillion. If they're off only tenfold, that's $70 trillion. Let alone it does not do what it says it does. It's not affordable, it does not cause health, does not help healthcare. So what's the best thing in the world for any business? It's called free markets. The Commerce Clause in Article 1, Section 8 says very clearly to make America a free trade zone. When I wrote that paper in 2010, there were 267 health insurance companies in the United States. What if all of them were in North Carolina competing for your dollar? Prices go down, quality goes up. In this state, you have a thing called certificate of need. Or if you want to open a hospital, you can't unless the legislators allow you. That hinders competition. So if you allow the free market to work constitutionally, the Commerce Clause correctly, have competition occur, that's the answer. The patient must decide what kind of health care they want, deserve, or decide. It is not controlled by a centralized top-down. And I get a side note, I read every word of HR 3590. It took me 5 months. For every page of law, there's 10 pages of regulations. The new ICD-10 codes come out in October. That strangulates the doctor's billing and the patient's choice. That is not the role of the federal government. That's why I understand clearly the constitutional remedy of that is the only way to get rid of that. Only way. And that's very important that states can step up and say no to this. Our ambassador must do that as well. So I believe the Commerce Clause, the Constitution, and free markets are the answer.
Mr. Alexander.
One of the saddest days I've experienced was back in January, I believe it was Christmas time in 2009 when Obamacare passed. I believe it must be repealed. I don't believe it's something that you can tinker with or try to band-aid, because you will just have another bad law with band-aids on it. Those thousands of pages of regulations that Dr. Brandon has read will not cure and has not cured, will not cure one single person. I believe that government basically should be getting out of the healthcare business altogether. However, there are some things that could be done to encourage the free market system. That is allowing people to set up health savings accounts, to have the ability for insurance companies to compete across state lines, and to be able to have more transparency in what are the actual costs associated with healthcare. And then the last but not least is this thing that has been around and proposed for many years. It's not anything new, but it's never been tried. We've never had the majorities in the government to get it done. And that is tort reform. We've absolutely got to have that so people do not continue to have to practice defensive medicine. I believe of all the candidates right now, I'm the only one that's signed the Independent Women's Forum pledge to do everything in my power to repeal Obamacare, and I will do just that. Thank you.
For me, getting rid of Obamacare is not just about repealing it. It's about repealing it, defunding it, challenging it legally. I've always looked at when you attack a problem, when you have set a goal, you advance towards that goal or attack that problem from every single angle that is moral, legal, and ethical. Because it does not matter how you reach that goal or tackle that problem so long as it is solved morally, legally, and ethically. When we look at doing away with Obamacare, what we have to realize is that we have also got Medicare, Medicaid, and even, believe it or not, student loans entangled in this massive law and group of regulations. So as we untangle it, we have to be aware of how each one of those are affected. Now, do I think it doesn't need to go? No, it must go. But we also have to look at how we will handle Medicaid and how we need to turn that over to the states and how we need to look at those entitlements and make sure that those entitlements go to our legal residents and legal American citizens. We also need to look at those people that no longer received Medicare or were denied Medicare because funding was taken away, and we need to be able to ensure that those people who were disabled that needed the health care can still get it while we're taking away Obamacare. We also need to ensure that anything tied with the student loans is taken away so that no student loans are contingent on anything to do with your health care, because as Dr. Brandon said, it is absolutely not in the 18 enumerated powers. It is not in our Constitution, and it must go. In order to help people with their health care, the best thing we can do is foster competitiveness and have our insurance companies compete for our customers' dollars and offer more than 4 plans. Because you think about it, when you go to buy a car, those dealerships compete for your dollars every single year with newer models, better makes, more bells and whistles, cheaper price, lower payments, and even financing deals. We also have to take the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services out of this, because what you don't realize is they're what sets a lot of what your insurance pays or will reimburse your doctors. And if you want to get better health care, that must go away as well, because that is still the federal government being in charge of how your providers, your labs, and your ancillary gets paid. And that has to go as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all of us have made it clear, as Vince said in the question, that we stand ready to repeal Obamacare. And I've been saying consistently across the state as we've been campaigning that I don't believe it can be fixed. I don't believe it can be tweaked. I think it must be repealed and it must be replaced. Not only, though, because I'm philosophically opposed to Obamacare, I think it's critical that all of us understand the economic disaster that Obamacare is creating for our nation. You see, the reality is that while we're philosophically opposed, we know that the Congressional Budget Office itself, in its numbers, said that Obamacare, left unchecked, would cost us in this country by 2023 $3.3 trillion just on health care. Now, it's amazing because as I travel the state and I share that with people, they almost look at me like, you know, well, we've heard $1 million here, $1 billion here, $1 trillion here. What's $3 trillion? And to put it in perspective, when you stop and realize that last year our federal government spent in total $3.7 trillion, then that means that by 2023, left unchecked, Obamacare will actually nearly double the size of spending by our federal government. And ladies and gentlemen, that is reason for alarm. That is the reason that when Senator Cruz went to the floor of the Senate that night to stand in his opposition and to be willing to filibuster and take all the snide remarks and all of the things that he had to take, he was doing it because he was one of the handful of people who seriously understood where Obamacare would lead us. And so I am grateful and had the privilege in October of telling him that I was thankful for his courage, I was thankful for his consistency, and I was thankful for his character that he had continued to stand and honor. Because bottom line, it will destroy us economically left unchecked. I've been saying across the state 3 things, and you've heard them said here tonight, and that is expand health savings accounts, allow folks to purchase health insurance across state lines, and number 3, put an end to the frivolous lawsuits that keep driving up the cost of health care in this country year after year. And I continue to stand by what I've been saying all along.
Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You know, before Obamacare, what did we have? Before we had between $1 trillion that we don't have now. What we had was a system that basically worked. The indigent folks received care. Of course, we paid for that out of our pockets, but they were receiving care. The only difficulty were 2 things: pre-existing conditions, and secondly, a situation whereby some people were not paid. We had 20 to 40 million people not being covered. My plan has always been the following. There are a lot of us who can afford a maximum deductible. The folks who make a little bit more money than others, there should be a stepped-up basis for how much a deductible should be. Number 2, those who are not paying should pay. Those who are well and are working should be required to pay their way. Number 3, at length with my brother-in-law, who's a surgeon, about this. What we did was devise what we call AmeriCare, which would bring back wonderful and retired physicians to work basically gratis and have protection from liability, and bring back these folks who would love to work when they're 65, 68, 70, 75 years old. Think of the hundreds of thousands of physicians that are out there just wanting something to do, but because of the regulations, which many of us lawyers are responsible for, and certainly the Congress, they cannot do it. I would suggest this in deference to my good friend to my left, who, by the way, is still practicing medicine while he's doing this. This is great to hear that. And that is this: bring the doctors back into the process. We need minds like this medical mind to come back and help us understand. I heard the other day that there was a dearth, an absence of about 16,000 general practitioners needed now. Why do we not have the doctors that we have now? Because I have a nephew who's a surgeon at Wake Forest Baptist. The red tape is just unbelievable. Operating room, $25,000, surgeon, $1,500. And that's about the way it works. We need to let these ladies and gentlemen come back and edify us, help us create a new system, a free system, and for heaven's sakes, in the long run, we get rid of Obamacare, which, by the way, was started by Bill and Hillary. And guess who's coming down the tracks, or wants to come down the tracks? You know, here she comes, so get ready. Thank you.
I think it's likely the number one issue of concern, and I know this from talking to business owners around the Charlotte area and throughout this entire region. That's the number one issue they seem to be concerned about, beyond Obamacare and its effects on the economy and the job market. What would you say is the number one issue that you would like to dig into if you were indeed elected as U.S. Senator, starting with Mr. Alexander?
There are actually several things, but they're all related. Our number one thing that we need to be working on is the creation of jobs and getting our economy going again. I think that's directly tied to Obamacare and its repeal, because I believe that right now Obamacare is a job killer. It's hurting many people in the process. I think we have way too many regulations in terms of our federal government. It's regulating every aspect of our lives, including agriculture, which is it's really hurting our small farmers, and any entrepreneur wanting to go into business is going to have a hard time doing that because of the number of regulations. And then, of course, taxes and the way that we spend our money. These things have got to be addressed. I think that right now our federal government is spending way too much, and it's taking in too much. We've got to reform the tax system so that it's a much fairer tax and allow people to keep more of the fruits of their labor. I heard the other day that our North Carolina Constitution basically guarantees us that we are able to keep the fruits of our labor. And I thought that was an interesting thing, that in our Constitution we say that in North Carolina, but yet our federal government comes in and takes it with the other hand. So I believe those things are all related, but our number one thing that we need to be working on is jobs and the creation of economic opportunity. And that won't happen until you address fully happen until you address these three issues.
For me, my number one priority is the economy and jobs as well. I know for a fact that the only way that we can continue to keep our country going and for you to survive every day is to have that ability to have that paycheck coming in and have that wage be enough to pay your bills and support your family and plan for a future. With that, we not only have to look at our regulation that is stifling our growth of business, but we also have to look at how our trade agreements are affecting our employability and corporations that want to do business here in the United States. We currently have a problem where China is shipping their goods to Vietnam. Vietnam is slapping a label on them that says made in Vietnam, and because we went to war there, they're shipping it here, and there is no stop for that, and China is reaping the benefits of that. Those are things that we have to look at. Those are things that we have to stop. We have to start looking at America first. And I know that sounds selfish, but ladies and gentlemen, the reason why we're here today and we have the deficits and the problems we have is because we have stopped looking to taking care of our own and are attempting to be nice, play nice, and take care of others. while we don't care what happens to our legal citizens here in America. So we have to stop the regulations that keep our corporations from wanting to be here, from bringing their money back here from foreign banks, and to have people want to start up small businesses. People who are unemployed no longer want to start up their own business because it's almost impossible to get that loan, thanks to Dodd-Frank, to begin that business. And these are things that we have got to change. Otherwise, we will not be the America that we even know today, and we're in a sad state. It would be horrible to see us go the way of other countries like Greece. Thank you.
Mr. Harrison.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. The priority of job creation, the economy, is key. But for the sake of saying something different, I'll point out that I think one of the top priorities that I would like to see happen in the United States Senate is begin to be that voice that will bring an end to the lawlessness that has overtaken our nation and our society. And it is a lawlessness that I am convinced is started at the top and is moving down. When you have a president of the United States that takes office and begins to determine which laws he's going to execute and which laws he won't, you've got a problem. When he then appoints an attorney general who begins to decide what he's going to consider to be constitutional and what he considers not to be constitutional, you've got a problem. And when that, and what he's going to enforce, and then when that attorney general begins to convince your state's attorneys general that they no longer have to respect the decisions that have been made by the people that are now part of their constitution, then you have a sense of lawlessness that has settled into the culture and settled into the society that must be dealt with. And I am concerned for that. And frankly, I believe that we need men and women of strength and courage that are going to be willing to stand with a backbone and call into account this administration and its leaders who determine to continue to operate outside the framework of the United States Constitution. And while we're on that note, it would send a great signal if we would call up some of these federal judges for impeachment from the bench who continue to refuse to understand their role is not to legislate from the bench. I believe correcting lawlessness in America would be a great first step to tackle in the United States Senate.
Well, those were great answers. I can't wait to hear Dr. Brandon's answer as well. What was the seminal issue of the 19th century in this country? We had people of color who were enslaved. We went through a terrible war in that regard. My great-grandfather, George Washington Snyder, went off with his 5 brothers, and only he came home. A terrible time in our nation. Slavery. What is the seminal issue of the 21st century for conservatives and Republicans? Life. 57 million, euphemism, abortioned from their mothers. I am sick to my stomach every time I hear that this is my body, I can do with it as I shall. A mother saying that. Sick to my stomach. It's time for conservatives in Washington, conservatives in Raleigh, conservatives all over this country to come together and require peaceably that Roe v. Wade must end, and it must end soon. We just forget these babies. Let me tell you of 2 stories. One is a case I handled involved an unborn child. The question was, could an unborn child at a certain age feel pain? I brought in a specialist, a neonatal specialist from Pittsburgh, and presented him to the court, and the court accepted his testimony that at 22 weeks, there was pain felt by the child in utero. That's now being in the papers almost every day. Secondly, I had a case involving an 8-pound child who was stillborn. The law was you could not bring a wrongful death case for a viable child in utero. I appealed that to the Court of Appeals, lost it, appealed that to the Supreme Court with a case called Di Donato. My case was more. The Supreme Court decided in favor of us that yes, a viable child in utero is a human being. That was the beginning of where we are now. what a privilege it was to be a part of that process from a legal standpoint. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, before you go home tonight, before you go to bed tonight, think about these children. We must eradicate this scourge from our great United States of America. Please help me to do that. Thank you.
Dr. Brent.
Every issue here is phenomenal. It's all because the federal government usurped their power. As I said at the very beginning, it's a constitutional crisis. We have to go back to the sovereign, is you. The role of the federal government is not to tell you to do all these aspects of your life. So you're talking about the first thing, is all these together. Because we do have a court that does legislate. We do have an executive branch that makes law. The legislative branch must hold them accountable, and the state legislators must hold them accountable. That's how a contract works. All the parties hold each other accountable to that. When the doers have to go bend their knee to the non-producers that are asked favors, that kills the economy. There's 176,122 federal regulations. That number is mind-boggling. That's not what the government's supposed to do. We have a Supreme Court that does legislate. According to the Constitution, there's no number of judges that got to be on the bench. And according to the Constitution, the federal government is broken up where the legislative branch has 33 functions, the executive 13, and the judicial branch has 6. And the judicial branch has no power to enforce their opinion. So why we bow to them is unacceptable. We must have our state legislators say, no, this state should not have Obamacare. This state should not have Common Core. This state should not have public-private partnerships. That is not the role of the federal government mandating on top of us.
Amen.
We do not know our position in that, well, look, on that contract, the checks and balances, we're on top because we're made in his image. Sanctity of life is in the Fifth Amendment. It says no life, liberty, or property should be taken without due process. But we must stand firm, and asking judges to change their mind on something they have no power to, we're giving their credence to their opinion. So that's why I'm with Mark. I cannot wait, God willing, I win the Senate race, to be sitting there and actually interviewing these men and women who are appointed to become in the Supreme Court or appellate court. Because I want to ask their question. We had one lady who was asked, can the federal government make you eat 3 vegetables a day? And the answer was yes, she said, and she's now sitting on the Supreme Court. Impeachment works. That's the power. In a position where the states say no, worked with slavery. The Supreme Court passed, the Congress passed a law in 1850 that said the Fugitive Slave Act, that any white man can say any black man is a slave with no court, no jury, and arrest him and bring him back home for a bounty. The Supreme Court said that's constitutional. A man named Joshua Glover made it to Wisconsin. The Supreme Court told Wisconsin to send him back. Wisconsin said, no, he's a man. That's peaceful resistance. That's the Constitution. The Declaration is our philosophy that tells us who is sovereign and what the legitimate role of government is. When that goes, we get back to a constitutional dollar, which in the Constitution it must be gold and silver.
Amen.
You will have a 17% growth over 100 years, not a 99% decrease in 100 years. See, again, everything we're talking about is because we're asking these children who are supposed to be our stewards, our trustees, became our warlords. And here's the saddest part. They've exempt themselves from Obamacare, inside trading, Dodd-Frank. They exempt themselves, and we say that's okay. That's why it's a constitutional crisis.
Those last comments from a couple of you are a great lead into the next question, which relates to the 10th Amendment that's supposed to limit the federal government to the enumerated powers that are specified in the Constitution. As we know, most of the federal government operates well beyond those boundaries. The question is, how can this federal system be brought back within its constitutional limits? Starting first with Ms. Grant.
Unfortunately for us, all of us out here, we would love to elect the next senator, us go up 2 days after we get there, we can turn around and start saying, no more Department of Education, no more EPA, let's change the IRS, but we know that that's not feasible. So what we have to do in reality is we have to go and we have to look at where we can make cuts. And a lot of this can come simply by cutting back our spending. As Mr. Alexander says, the penny plan. A lot of people tout that the penny plan is not viable because you can't take a penny out of every dollar because there are just some things you can't cut. Well, I'm here to tell you, for those things that you swear you can't cut, you can take pennies from other areas and we can start shaving out those agencies that we do not need and do not belong to the federal government and should be a state mandated area. It is truly that simple. Now, it is a long process. It will take us a little while to get there, but the good thing is that there's hope and it is absolutely doable, but you have to take it one step at a time, and it again goes back to laying that foundation and making sure we have good, conservative people representing us in Washington who are citizen legislators.
I believe, as Heather said, and particularly in the last few words that she touched on there, that there are a number of things that folks oftentimes talk about what can be done to bring things back. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I have maintained is that really and truly, the system itself is not what's broke. It's the people that we have sent there to operate the system that have tended to mislead us and to take us down a path. I do think, as I said when we started, that we can talk about a constitutional crisis, but the reality is, in many cases, it's a leadership crisis that has brought on the constitutional crisis. And it comes back to you and me being willing to get over our apathy and be willing to get involved in the process and be willing to step up and bring new leadership. That's one of the reasons I got into this race, because I ultimately believe that it's time that we have people from all walks of life that will be the citizen legislator, that will go to Washington, D.C., do the people's business, make the decisions that are tough, just like we have to make every day in our own businesses, in our own homes, in our own families. As a pastor of a church, I know what it is. When your revenue is down, you have to cut the budget. You have to make hard decisions. We need to be doing that same thing in Washington, D.C. And I do believe that we can begin to eliminate departments. But I also believe that while we eliminate departments, say of education, energy, or commerce, there are harder decisions that will be required to be made, and that's dealing with the entitlements and being willing to step forward and say, we've got to make hard decisions. Mike Huckabee, who has endorsed me, made the statement to me last year when he and I talked about the situation. And he said, Mark, there's two kinds of Republicans in the United States Senate. There are those who are just going along to get along, and they're just glad to be part of a club. And then there's a small group who really understand the crisis that we're facing in America today, and they recognize that they need to take the hard votes, deal with the hard issues, and may even be willing to lose their next election cycle in order to do it. He said, my prayer is if you do this and God gives you success, that you will be in that latter group that will have the courage to be willing to stand. I believe it's not the system that's broke, it's the leaders that we've been sending there.
Moderator, I agree entirely with what was said. It's the people we're sending there. If you're in a war or a battle, what do? Who do you send to fight that battle? I went to 3 years of law school, rigorous. I've been practicing law for 43 years, in court almost every day, in all kinds of courts, all the way up to the Supreme Court. I just detailed to you how my God-given skill helped move us along in terms of life. Now, every day, every single day, I deal with the Constitution. I've studied the Constitution. I've studied law. I've written 2 legal treatises on law. I've written 19 books during my law practice, 8 of which are later editions. One is entitled The Conservative Mind, A New Model for Government. My plan is out there. I've proven that I'm a warrior, a battler. What you need in Washington, what you really need in Washington, we all have good minds. We all have great ideas. You need somebody who can get it done. What you need is a fighter. You need someone who's used to battling every single day. I battle DAs, I battle lawyers, I'm observant with judges, but I battle almost everyone in the courtroom, even my clients sometimes in terms of what you should do, sir. That's what I'm trained to do. Primarily these days, not even trying cases, but we settle cases. Gridlock in Washington, send a fighter, send a lawyer. Whatever people think of lawyers, we're good people. I've got 6 grandkids and 2 granddaughters and a beautiful wife, and I've been so blessed. My father was so mild-mannered. I guess I get it from my mother and her family. But somebody's got to be the fighter. Somebody's got to be the fighter. But you can't really be a fighter unless you believe in your heart. Send me to Washington to watch what happens. Let me go up there and prove to you what I can do, what I've been trained to do. I spent all of my life writing over 3.5 million words, 6,700 pages of work. And I've learned how to do it in a quick way. The corporate treatise took 5 days to write. I learned how to write really quickly. I've got ways of calling out government so that we can simplify government. Read my books, you'll find that out. But give me a chance. I'm Jim Snyder. I want a chance to be your David against Goliath. I found other ways, just like David did with the small stones against all that armor. That's the way I'm going to treat it. I'm going to go up there and rip and snort and holler and cajole and beg. My wife the other day, I'm almost finished, said, you don't want to beg, do you? I said, Sandra, I beg every day. I'll beg to get what I want for the people of the United States of America, including the good people of North Carolina. Thank you very much.
Great. Vince. The question was the 10th Amendment, am I correct? I've kept my Hippocratic Oath for 26 years. You cannot lead, I believe, unless you know the roadmap. As a surgeon, I spent 15 years trying to scalpel a hand for the first time. I've read the last 8 years. I read every convention note of 1787 to 1789. I know those words that they're debated. They did not give away our state sovereignty to the federal government, other than those 18 functions. Jefferson said the 10th Amendment is the cornerstone of the Constitution, or the Constitution never would have passed. The 10th Amendment says the powers that are not enumerated are to the peoples and to the states. That's why it's crucial to know that document, and to have the wherewithal and the backbone to stand no matter what. We have to know that position and understand that 10th Amendment. That goes back to Article 6, Clause 2. It says the Constitution is supreme law in the land and pursuant thereof. Pursuant thereof means if it's not listed, it's not there. So that's why the 10th Amendment, again, I agree with Jefferson, being the cornerstone of what we are. So that's how you fight. That's how you go back to it. That's why Senator Cruz stood there and said, House, the Senate can't defund this. In Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1, it's the House that must defund. Knowing the Constitution allows you to play the game correctly. When other people tell you what it says, but you don't go to it, then you're letting them go. I believe today's leaders, as Mark talked about, aren't serving citizens. Either one of two things. They're ignorant of the Constitution, they must be replaced, or they're arrogant of the Constitution, they must be replaced. And I'm talking about those leaders. Well, 2 of them, Senator Paul and Senator Lee, have actually endorsed me. Those 3 men with Senator Cruz, Joe Biden said, stop the attack on the Second Amendment by them standing firm. The Obama thing was ready to pass until Ted stood and said no for 21 hours and 13 minutes. When Rand stood there a year and a half ago for 13 hours on drones, I wrote a paper, I did a TV radio show on drones. I was laughed at by the Republican establishment, but I read NDA 2012. 30,000 drones over our country by 2020. And the thing's unacceptable. The 4th Amendment, your safety and personal property. All of our cell phones are like today's data, and we put up with that. General warrants are unconstitutional. FISA's unconstitutional. We must get men and women, warriors he talked about, that will never waver. Me, there will be life in the Constitution, never.
We face a situation right now where the federal government basically looks at states as an extension of themselves. This is a real problem and is in conflict with the 10th Amendment. And at the local level, I've seen this firsthand, because at the local level, as a government entity, we were told basically from the federal government, which then goes to the state and then pushes down to the local government, that we had to do, we had to basically comply with their regulations from everything from the size and the style of our street sign level, all the way to the type of swimming pool that we would have, and what kind of filter system that we would have on that swimming pool. Those are the kinds of things that are being micromanaged from Washington, D.C. The kind of thing that ought to be done, basically, is we need people who go to Washington, D.C., who have had to serve at the local level first, and who have seen firsthand the opportunities that I've had to see of how these regulations have basically hurt people, and how we have to pick up the pieces at the local level when the federal government comes down and pushes down onto the state and then the local level. We're the ones that basically then have to pay for those kinds of things, those unfunded mandates. My thought is that any new regulations that come down the pike, you know, if they have to come down the pike, which most of them I don't know that they really do, but they ought to be required to the same standards as anybody else that we do in North Carolina, which is basically we have sunset clauses. And if they are no longer necessary and they're no longer applicable, then we need to get rid of those, because basically what we're seeing is the same regulations being applied year and year and year, and the reason that they were enacted in the first place is no longer there. We need to have people up in Washington who basically understand what it's like to be a servant leader. I believe if they really understood that they really have to be closest to the people, which is what a local elected person is, that they would have the opportunity not to pass those kinds of things that are basically hurting us at the local level. I believe those are the kinds of things. We need that, plus I believe that our Supreme Court and our judges that are making laws from the bench basically are overriding the 10th Amendment, because they are basically overturning the state's sovereign rules that we make when we pass an amendment to our Constitution. When is a judge going to overturn that? And I'm hoping that will not occur. But we need to have judges who are appointed who will respect the state and their sovereignty in those kinds of matters, because if we want to pass a marriage amendment or any other kind of bill that applies to our Constitution, then we better be able to do it. And I think that judges ought to be respectful of that.
We're going to do something a little unusual here for one question and notify our timekeeper here. We're going to do somewhat of a lightning round here and a related question. And this relates to the question of judges. Would you support impeachment charges against judges for judicial activism? And we'll start that question with Pastor Mark Harris, and you get 1 minute.
Yes.
Here comes the lawyer in me. I want to be honest with you. Impeachment is a terrible thing and a wonderful thing. It's just like a weapon. It must be used very, very judiciously. I don't disagree with my colleagues here, but I'm cautious. In a country such as this, before that, as the Constitution requires, there must be more than clear, cogent, and convincing evidence. There must be proof beyond a reasonable doubt to impeach any federal official. Certainly, if the Constitution says there must be high crimes and misdemeanors before one can be convicted. One thing to impeach is another thing to convict. Yes, if that level is met, certainly I'm in favor of it, but I don't want to get on a bandwagon here without being very judicious indeed.
This ties together exactly as Ted talked about. He talked about the top-down local. Hamilton at 33, 38, and Madison at 45 and 51 explain just the opposite of what Ted says is reality today. The local government is the most powerful in your life, and the sheriff is going to protect you from the federal government usurping the power. That's why impeachment was a crucial, not just for the judges, for Attorney General Holder, for any of the leaders in these executive positions or judicial positions that broke their oath. But this is why it's crucial to understand that Constitution. All inquiry is in the House. The House has the power to look at any single document the executive has. Any single document. Look back at how Washington gave us papers of the Jay Treaty. See, that's the idea of that checks and balances. When one part of that executive branch or just one steps out of line, it's a legislative branch that has that power. And the judicial branch has to be superseded by the Senate we're applying for. But the idea of impeachment is through the House.
As Brandon said, I've seen firsthand how local government is the closest to the people, and I believe it is the best and most responsive to those people, and the citizens. I also agree with what Mr. Snyder said in terms of impeachment being something that has to be used judiciously. But I believe that there is good judgment and there is really bad judgment. And what we're seeing right now in terms of so many federal judges is really bad judgment in terms of their perspective on the Constitution. And if they overstep their boundaries and if they are overturning basically laws that are passed by the state and have no bounds for it, no grounds for it, then I do believe that they need to be called for impeachment. I do believe right now that our Attorney General is basically way overstepping his boundaries and is not enforcing the laws. And I would go ahead and call for his impeachment right now.
Mark said it best, just simply yes.
One same line of questioning. We'll go back to 3 minutes and go into a related question. There's a big concern, obviously for a variety of reasons, about government overreach, federal government overreach. There's been a lot of talk about nullification and potential convention of states. What are your views on the best approach to restore constitutional balance? And we'll start that question with Mr. Snyder.
Education. Just like with any important public issue, we all must know the left and the right. I work in the courtroom. You just don't hear one side. You've got to hear both sides. You've got to hear all the evidence. You've got to consider the facts. You've got to consider the facts with the law. This is not some lawyer just talking in mumbo jumbo. I love the law. I love the Constitution more. I understand the role of the federal government are basically three: protect our borders, protect our sovereignty, and act only when local and state governments cannot suffice. And that's where we've had a problem. Now, like with the impeachment situation, bad judgment is one thing, high crimes and misdemeanors are another. We must be knowledgeable, ladies and gentlemen. I want to praise you for being here. What percentage of our populace are sitting in a place like this discussing such issues? I feel like I'm back in Philadelphia with Washington and Jay and Hamilton, all sitting around right before the Declaration was signed. And Adam said, "Tom, go upstairs." And Tom did. Raised the window. It was a hot night. It was when his pen touched parchment, you could see an explosion of liberty. It went out that window and across the Delaware River. And then it circled all the world. And today it's continuing to circle all the world, except for the Soviet Union. These are difficult times, folks. We really must be circumspect as you are. Go home, talk to your friends, and tell them what we talked about. Be interested, stay interested. I want to thank you for being here. It means a whole lot to our country. Thank you.
This question is to you all. Folks, we're complaining about Obamacare, we're complaining about other things. What is the actual mechanism to say no to the federal use of power? That is crucial. Again, Hamilton, his 33rd paper, talked about nullification. James Iredell at our convention in 1788 was asked the question, what does pursuant thereof mean? And he said, if the federal government ever usurps their power and passes a law that's not enumerated, he said it's null and void in the state. He was on the first Supreme Court appointed by George Washington. Madison, Jefferson wrote the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions that walk us through. The northern states nullified the Fugitive Slave Act. In 1832, Madison wrote a paper concerning nullification when Calhoun what he wanted to do is he wanted to nullify a constitutional law. A tariff is constitutional because it's in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, the spending clause. And Madison said, no, you cannot. That's not, you cannot nullify a constitutional act. But you can't step up on an unconstitutional act. Because this is the crux of the whole thing. What is our mechanism as a state, as an individual? If it's to go bend your knee to a Supreme Court to ask them to change their mind, they've changed their mind twice since 1937. And it's not in the Constitution. If you're going to go to executive order and ask them to change their mind, it's not in the Constitution. And our Declaration of Independence is our first nullification document that we actually wrote to declare why to the world men should be free as individuals. So you got to go back, and that's why I believe reading the debates in every single state convention in Philadelphia, they articulate exactly the position we have. The position we have as an individual is the one who the sovereign made in his image. We are the ones asserting our rights. We are the one bestowing our liberty for a government to do one thing and one thing only: protect the individual from usurp their powers. Madison was really clear in the 45th paper that says the federal government has certain and defined functions, no more, no less. That's why it's important that we know this contract. I'm a pelvic surgeon. I may have good intentions, but if I open Mr. Snyder's brain, he's going to be a bad work of hurt. I did not prepare for that. That's where we must understand that contract, that 6 pages and what it means. Because if we keep on going back and asking for judges to change their mind, we have now turned the rule of law into the rule of men. And our founders did not love judge precedents. They did not. We put our Constitution on a piece of paper because the English Constitution was not on paper. We could always go back to it. In the Convention of Philadelphia, they had a 1655 English dictionary to debate every word. It's so beautiful to go back and watch the arguments they had. And at every single time, they never took their eye off the ball. The government's role is to protect the individual from the collective. That's our American Republic.
Nullification, I think the bigger picture is, and the biggest issue really is, why in the world are we now having to discuss that? I don't think we would have had this discussion 20, 30 years ago. But now we face a federal government basically that has overstepped its boundaries so much that we're having to have this kind of conversation. And I believe there are 3 things. One, I believe that we're having this discussion because our federal elected officials have absolutely forgotten what it's like to be a public servant, and they've forgotten the Constitution, and they don't recognize the states and their sovereignty. The second thing is we have judges who are now appointed who basically overturn states and their decisions. Those judges that are appointed, and the Senate has a big role in appointing judges, must be those who uphold the Constitution, the original intent of the Constitution. And then the third thing is I really believe that the idea that Jim Langford has posited down for the compacts of states, I think that is an opportunity right there to begin to get around some of the stuff like Obamacare that we're facing right now. Because I believe it's Article 4 and Amendment 2 both give itself to allowing states to enter into compacts amongst themselves and be able to basically take on the same role as nullification.
That's correct.
When it comes to nullification or an Article 5 convention, if that was what the state of North Carolina wanted, that would be what I would support, either one. However, when you think about what you're doing with nullification, you have to realize that if you stand and tell the federal government no and you nullify something, what are those consequences? And you have to be prepared as a state for those consequences. Texas is a prime example. Texas is prepared to nullify. Texas is prepared to stand on their own. If our state, as a U.S. Senator, if our state decided that nullification was the way it would want to go, then I would stand with my state because that would be my job. But I would want to remind you that we would need to ensure that we could handle any and all consequences. For the Article 5 Confederation, that is wonderful. If we put it together, the lovely thing about that, it says when we get together and we lay out the groundwork for that, we can talk about as states and agree as states what we will and will not vote on, and then we still have to have that consensus. So for me, Either is a viable option, but we must look at everything that can come of either of those choices, if that was what North Carolina were to decide.
I do think that it's important for us to recognize the issue of nullification and to recognize that it is something that we need to maintain our power and authority, because anything that is going to restrict the power of the federal government is a good thing. And we need to make sure that we understand what we have in that power. However, I really think the issue goes beyond just nullification, and we need to recognize that the tentacles that the federal government has go so far into our lives now that it's not just about nullification, but it's really about cutting those tentacles that the federal government has wrapped around us. And to me, probably the most legitimate way to begin to make the biggest step toward doing that would be the idea we've talked about with a fair tax and reforming our tax system. And you can't really do a fair tax without, first of all, having the courage to repeal the 16th Amendment, and therefore assuring us that a fair tax would be a fair tax. That would probably do more to actually cut the tentacles of the federal government and the power that they have over us than anything else we could do. And I think that's a critical point to recognize, that that these tentacles that the federal government has now created and wrapped around all of our lives individually is the bigger picture issue that needs to be dealt with. And that would be a very legitimate and very simple way to make that step.
We're going to do a couple of things here at the same time, so bear with me as I put these things out there. We've had a lot of good questions here, good answers regarding the Constitution, the balance of power, and we want to delve into some other areas here. There's so many things that we would like to talk about tonight. I want to put out a question. At the same time I do that, I want to give you in the audience an opportunity to ask a question. And this will be a lightning round question, and each of the candidates will get a minute to answer that question. So we'll allow one person on each side here to come to the microphone, and we'll take up that question next after we address this particular question. 1 minute on this one. There are people who suggest Republicans should abandon social issues in order to win. How do you respond to that idea? We'll begin with Brett.
I disagree 100%. The fabric of our society is the family. The fabric of our society is life. We can't, there's a Bible verse, Romans 12:9 says, hate evil, cling to good. Right? The first two words are the most important, in genuine love. We go to them with love concerning social issues, abortion, and talk about that little baby inside that woman. The word fetus in Latin means to the age of 18. I mean, they use these words to make you think it's something different. Once you change a person to something non-person, then you lose rights. That's why we must always close fiber who that is. Again, our society, family, life is before any government. It's God's plan. And if you out that, you have no liberty, you have no pursuit of happiness. I disagree with that. We stand firm when we believe that will build a coalition that will actually change our country.
I agree with that as well. Absolutely, the Republican Party must hold firm on social issues. George Washington himself said that you cannot have a good government, without having a moral government. And those morals, I do believe, are found in our founding documents in terms of they have a biblical basis on them. The right to life is intrinsic in the Declaration of Independence. We are guaranteed life. And that must never be changed. That must not be taken away. We have to protect the unborn baby. And it is a baby, as Dr. Brandon says, that he knows very well. I'm a parent of an adopted child. We adopted our daughter from Romania almost 18 years ago. We faced a time, at that point in time, we had the opportunity to decide when we first got her whether or not she had some profound mental deficiency. And we basically, at that time, we had a decision. And that we had to make that decision. And the decision was that we would keep that child, because if we did not, it would be tantamount to abortion. We must keep the moral and social fabric of issues in the Republican
And to give those up gives up who we are. And we realize that a lot of times people make social issues, especially the Democrats and the liberals, what we base elections on. But I truly believe that we can stand on our morals and stand on our values and fight them on the other issues as well. Make them come to the table on our economy and on our jobs and on health care, and not just make it about the fact that we are good, moral people with steadfast values.
I agree. I go back to where I started tonight, Reagan's three-legged stool. He said a strong domestic agenda, strong foreign policy, and strong traditional values. And if you try to weaken or break off any one of those three legs, that stool cannot stand. You'll never have to wonder where Mark Harris stands on those traditional value issues, because I bring to this race something far more valuable than a voting record. I bring a life record. Because you see, for 25 years, I know what it is. You never have to wonder where I'm going to stand on life, because when Dobson was asking for folks to come in 90 and 91 to the Washington Monument and stand for unborn children, my wife and I were there with our firstborn, along with church members we took. I know what it is to stand on Silas Street Parkway and Peters Creek Parkway in Winston-Salem, holding a sign with hundreds of people on either side and something called Life Chain, praying for the unborn children. I know what it is to stand for traditional marriage, because when that fight came to North Carolina, I led that fight, along with many of you, for the marriage amendment in this state. You'll never have to wonder where I stand.
Reverend, thank you. I can't recite many things George Washington said, but I think he said something that the Reverend just might enjoy. And happy though it is to reflect that a brother's sword has been sheathed in a brother's breast, and that the once happy and peaceful plains of America are either to be drenched in blood or inhabited by slaves. Strong words from the great George Washington. I think he's telling us that some decisions are really tough, but tough people must make good and right decisions. We must not give up the moral fight, the moral battle. And we had that happen down in February the other night. You remember, guys and gals? A lady named Margaret said it and said, "Why don't we just push the babies to the background?" Well, we were nice to her, but we let her know that we did not agree. Every one of us, to a man and to a lady, did not agree with that.
I want to continue along this theme of lightning round questions, and this one, before we get into some foreign policy issues, I thought it would be good for us to deal with some issues that I think can be dealt with here pretty quickly. One of them, the IRS has apparently been used as a political tool against conservatives. As a senator, what would you do to address this and deal with the broader issue of tax policy? And we'll begin there with Mr. Alexander. 1 minute.
I believe that the Internal Revenue Service has, of late, as has been mentioned, become the Internal Revenge Service. And I believe that this institution really is overstepping its boundaries in so many ways. One of the things that I really like about the fair tax is that we basically almost reduce the role of the IRS to no role at all almost. And I really like that. And I think that that would be the best way that we can begin to take the IRS out of our lives. Because right now, they are being used as to go after their political enemies. We are going to have to apologize to Richard Nixon one of these days, because he only thought about doing that. And he was crucified for thinking about that. We have a president who's actually doing that. And they're going after people like Tea Parties and religious groups and Christian groups. And that alone is another reason. If we don't have an Attorney General who will stop it, he needs to be impeached.
That's great.
I am a huge proponent of the fair tax. I have talked about it since I got into this race back in August, and for me, there are two big draws. The biggest one is that the IRS almost completely goes away, because you don't need never-ending taxes with loopholes and 70-some thousands worth of pages to explain how you're going to pay your taxes. And I think when we take the IRS out of your pocket by stop allowing them to look at our income on a bi-weekly or monthly basis, depending on how you're paid, that does a lot for us. And then there's no way that they're involved in going through what you make and you earn and having you to be accountable. But the thing that we have to realize is we also have to reform how they look at 501Cs, because that is where we're getting a lot of this intrusion. And that is not necessarily based on your personal income tax. That is actually just paperwork stating that you don't want to file taxes. And so not only would you have to do away with that section, you would need better oversight and audit.
Yes, I think I may have answered this question in the previous question to some degree, but I am a proponent of the fair tax. I think we believe there needs to be serious tax reform in our country. I don't have all the answers, and will be honest with you that upon getting to the United States Senate, I want to be able to look at all of the options and look at the different programs. But as I did state earlier, the fair tax really can't be the fair tax unless we are guaranteed that we are not going to have the income tax that the 16th Amendment would need to be repealed. So I think it's a total package deal that we need to be moving toward in tax reform in this country.
Mr. Stein. This issue is about money, not just tax money. Why was the North American Free Trade Agreement passed? Money. Why have we not gotten a response to all of our life for the fair tax? Money. Some years ago, not many years ago, I looked at the Fortune 500 list of companies. Guess who is number 5? Accountants. That's my case.
The role of the government is to not take your property. It's your income. I'd eliminate the 16th Amendment, the Fed, get them gone. You want to really be scared? The IRS is the enforcement arm of Obamacare. Unacceptable. Brutus wrote a paper in 1788, said if we ever have an income tax in the United States, we'll have armed federal agents come to your house, taking your property, putting you in jail. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 is how you raise government money constitutionally. In the Constitution, in Article 1, Section 9, it says no direct capitation tax. The 16th Amendment must go away. The Fed must be audited. That will lead to its destruction, and the IRS will go with it. This is simple.
Yes, sir. State your name and your question.
My name is Jim Cohen, and I have a question in regards to immigration. This is a yes or no. We'll give you 2 options here. Do you believe that our current immigration service system is broken, or do you believe that we need to enforce the border, secure the border, and enforce current law and deport the alien invaders?
1 minute, starting with Mr. Alexander.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm asking because
I believe we need to secure our border. I believe we need to find the people who are here illegally as the criminals they are, because they've broken our laws. I have no problem with deporting them, and I firmly believe that they should not be given any bonus, any money, pass go, free of charge, nothing, because they have committed a criminal act. And what was the other part? I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was just asking, do you believe that our current system is broken like a lot of the Washington establishment believe, or do you believe that we need to secure the borders, enforce current law, and deport alien invaders when we find them?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about rounding them up.
No, yes, I understand what you're saying. Yes, and we do need to enforce the laws that we have, because we do have a lot of people who are here on visas that are expired because we have refused to enforce those laws. And they do pick and choose who gets an easy time of getting their visa, renewed, and who doesn't. And so, yes, I am for securing our borders. I am for enforcing the laws that we have now, and I am for deporting those people that we find that are here illegally, because, as I said before, to me, they have committed a criminal act.
Right. Before you go to Mr. Harris here, I want to just say a personal note. I fear immigration worse than I fear the threat of terrorism.
Yeah, this is like, okay. I do agree exactly with the things that Heather pointed out. We've been saying consistently on the immigration issue that I wholeheartedly believe securing the border has got to happen before any other conversations can happen. And I'm totally in support of enforcement. I talked a few weeks ago with a sheriff in a Piedmont County in North Carolina who was the first Republican sheriff since 1947 in that county. He has spent most of his term having to lawyer up and deal with the United States Justice Department, who has accused him of targeting a segment of the society for arrest. He said, and he's a fine Christian man, and he said, Mark, I believe red, yellow, black, or white, we're all precious in God's sight, but if you break the law in my county, I'm going to arrest you. We need a federal government that will support a sheriff who is honoring his oath and enforcing those laws.
I subscribe to the above, but again, why do we have a problem? Well, number one, the border is not secured. Number two, we have an economic system that needed labor. So somebody up there is affecting and effecting the process, like with the accountant situation. We must know the cause of the disease, of the pathogen, of the microbe, before we can eradicate the disease. And in this situation, it's always back to money, back to money. We must be aware of all those factors. It's just, these are not easy processes. These are processes that must be logically and syllogistically deduced and thought about. Again, thanks for being here because you're helping all of us to think more. That's exactly what the whole country needs to do. Thank you.
We'll go back to that pesky Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, protect sovereign borders, number one. We're built on legal immigration. Legal immigration. Amnesty never, ever has worked. Look what happened in California. It's protect the borders. I want to know more about our founders' thoughts. I read Madison's report of 1800 about immigration. It goes back to the idea again of the sovereign borders, the individual coming here legally. But you look at what he's talking about, the chamber back in one of our opponents, Mr. Tillis. He likes the weakening of that. You look at the idea of who does not pay for Obamacare? Illegal immigrants. There's a system here that's dragging them here. We must protect our borders. That is the rule, the law of the sovereign nation and the federal responsibility.
The preamble of the Constitution says that we must provide for the common defense. The common defense in this case is that we must protect our borders. It's that simple. It's very clear that we are not doing that. And as a result, what we're seeing is we basically have invited people to come into our country illegally because we have not erected a border that's sufficient to keep people out. I think it's possible. We can do it. We fought a Cold War. We have army bases and military bases stationed throughout the world. Why in the world can't we station people along our border and keep people out that don't need to be coming in illegally? I think that we're also inviting, basically right now we have an administration right now that is basically inviting people by broadcasting advertisements to people across the border that says if you come to the United States, we're going to take care of you. That is completely wrong. So we have laws on the books. If people are caught and they're illegal, then they need to be sent back. It's pretty simple. So I believe right now we must protect our borders and then we must send the people back that are caught.
Yes, sir, Steve, go ahead.
I just want to do a kind of a follow-up on the gentleman's question. Our legal immigration system is a disaster. In the mid-'60s, thanks to Ted Kennedy, he was able to change what was a successfully working legal immigration system into one that's been a disaster over the last 50 years. We bring in about 1.2 million legal immigrants a year, the largest percentage of them uneducated and poor, and the greatest percentage of them from Latin America. It stressed our social welfare systems over the decades, greatly contributed to the problem we have. Canada, Australia actually have legal immigration systems that work for them. So my question to you is, would you be a voice to reform our legal immigration system into one that's functional and is in the best interest of our country?
We'll put you on the spot this time to, if you can, answer this question with a sentence starting with Patrick.
Yes. Yes, I do believe that there are areas that we need to look at in our current immigration program. And I would be that voice again, I think there are things, it is a complex issue in terms of the current situation. I think the worker visa program is something that it needs to be seriously looked at. We do have a labor issue. As you talk to farmers in North Carolina, you talk to folks in the fishing industry, they'll tell you that there's a labor issue and that they wrestle with. And what's interesting about it, unlike this liberal federal government, this administration, those workers that are coming in, they don't want amnesty. They don't even want a pathway to citizenship. They just want to be able to come in as seasonal workers, earn money, and go back and take care of their families. And so I think there's some things that need to be done and looked at within that program, which is just one part of a very complex system that you're raising the question about. But yes, I would want to be a voice, and I would want to be looking into that.
Anything else, Mr. Stein?
This is let's see, Mexico is a foreign country. This is a foreign policy issue. Who's in charge or not in charge of our foreign policy?
Brett?
President.
Yes, sir. I would definitely have to streamline our plans and make it existing and constitutional.
Mr. Alexander?
I think that we do need to address the issue of immigration in terms of the way it's done right now. Right now, we are basically encouraging people to come illegally because the legal system is so cumbersome and takes so long that people feel like they have a better chance of coming in the other way. I think if we work very hard, as the gentleman said, if we expand the ability to come legally and to make that system more efficient, then I think that would help solve a lot of the issues.
Yes, I would want to be a voice for that reform because we need to look at what is in our best interest as American citizens and not just continue to allow anyone through our doors, so to speak, to stay here. We have to be realistic about what comes into our country, and then we have to be able to have it be sustainable and a system that's renewable and feasible and effective and efficient.
Going to do something a little strange here at the end, and I'd like to, if you can, do 30 seconds on the clock this time, because I want to cover at least these questions, 4 final questions. Each of you get 30 seconds to answer these questions. 30 seconds. I want to start with an issue. We've talked a lot about money tonight, and there's obviously concerns with our ongoing debt about the possibility of our dollar losing its reserve currency status. If that happens, what should be done to attempt to restore that status, or what would you recommend altogether? And I believe we're starting back over here with Mr. Snyder. 30 seconds.
Well, Mr. Moderator, gets back to foreign policy. Our currency is being affected by the fact that the Chinese and other countries own us. We need to change that. We need Republican White House. And we need some people in Congress with some backbone who don't mind getting upset.
I answered this question on Glenn Beck last week. Have our currency backed by gold. When our currency is as good as gold, the world will gravitate towards us. That's why it's called good as gold. Then we become reserved because of that. It's simple. Our founders debated that. Currency backed by a constitutional dollar. It's gold and silver.
I'm going to have to ask that you repeat the question because I didn't quite catch the content.
And the question is about the risk of the United States, our currency, our dollar, ceasing to be the world's reserve currency. What action should we take to prevent that from happening or to fix this if we do lose that status?
Okay. Yeah, I believe one of the things that many people may not think about actually is the fact that militarily that we must remain strong. Otherwise, what we're facing right now is a situation where countries such as Russia or China may say that they're not going to respect the dollar. And I think that comes as because we're being seen as weak. And I believe we must be strong in order to, militarily, to be able to prove to them that we can back up whatever we say we will do. And I think then we're going to continue to respect our currency.
We can do a complete and full audit of our Fed, understand how it functions and what it touches, and look at getting rid of what we don't need. And we can also stop printing money like it grows on trees in our backyard. That would help shore up our dollar.
I agree with something that Jim Snyder mentioned down there, and that is when we stop and realize that this national debt that we continue to build, and you stop and you see what has happened. In November alone, we borrowed $12 billion from the Chinese. We now owe them $1.3 trillion, which means that every citizen of China is due $1,000 from us tonight. Until we get this debt under control and stop our spending out of control in Washington, we will continue to see the problem. That needs to be our first priority.
And this would be a good time to go into this question again, 30 seconds. If Russia continues its aggressive overtures toward former Soviet states and Europe seems to waffle, do you support the possibility of the United States getting militarily involved? Starting first, Dr. Grant.
Yeah, aggression by anybody has to be condemned, number one. Number two, if America is actually energy independent, we have the most natural gas, shale. We did an oil refinery, gasoline in 1973. Anwar is as big as a postage stamp compared to a football field. Let us be energy sufficient, independent, that we can actually pick where we got to be around the world for individual American liberty.
Again, we have to be militarily strong. We cannot go along with the cuts that are being proposed. We have to be the preeminent power, I believe, in the world in terms of our military. I do not think that we need to go to war with Russia. I believe that right now there are things that could be done to prevent them from doing further excursions. I believe we need to have a missile defense system, and I believe that we need to actually back up whenever we say that we're going to do something. Otherwise, they're just going to continue to make incursions.
I don't take sending my brothers and sisters in uniform to war lightly. If Russia attacks us or threatens us, then yes, we have to retaliate. We cannot stand by and allow them to show force, though, without answering back in some way. And I don't mean drawing a red line in some imaginary pad of sand. What we have to do is we have to open up our Keystone Pipeline. We have to take applications to drill in Anwar, and we have to talk to the EU about buying our natural gas from us.
I do believe that what we face in the world today needs to be in our attention. I fully believe that we should only engage militarily when the security interests of the United States are at stake. But I also understand that America's word means something. We told the Ukraine, you won't need your missiles, get rid of them, we're going to take care of you under Bill Clinton. If we're ever going to have a foreign policy, America's word still needs to mean something. I believe two things. One, we need to offer military assistance to Ukraine. That doesn't mean troops, it could just mean intelligence. And secondly, re-institute the talks with Poland for the strategic defense.
What happened to Pax Americana, America, hegemony? Tell you what happened. The president ceded our authority in Europe over to the European Union and said, here, you deal with it. All these states. We are one state in terms of the federal system, one power, and the president has ceded that, and now you've got to look at Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland next. War now, we must get ready and be prepared and take care of our allies over there before it happens again. Not war now, not now. Bring me to your home sometime or your school, and I'll tell you why we could have stayed out of almost every war we were ever in. And I can show it to you, prove it to you.
Terrific. I'm going to combine the last two questions for the sake of time, and I think we can wrap that. I think we'll give you a shot. One more question.
I have a yes or no question. Very easy. Considering that we are over $17 trillion in debt, and we have over $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities, will you give us your word, if you're elected senator from North Carolina, that you would never vote to raise the debt ceiling? Never, ever.
Absolutely.
Absolutely what?
Absolutely not.
No, would not vote to raise the debt ceiling.
I'm opposed to raising the debt ceiling.
No, except in cases of national emergency.
Final question, dividing these questions together. Try to do this within 30 seconds. We wrap up tonight. First question is, if you are elected, who do you envision working with in the U.S. Senate? Question 2, do you pledge to support the GOP nominee with your vote in the general election, regardless of who wins the nomination, and urge your supporters to do the same? So those 2 questions together, and I believe it starts with Mr. Alexander, 30 seconds.
I've thought about this quite a bit. Right now, I would align myself with Ted Cruz because of Obamacare. I like Mike Lee because I think he's really the brains behind so many of the things that are important to us right now. I do like some other senators as well for other different reasons. I like Jeff Sessions out of Alabama because I believe he's a true Christian gentleman. And I really like Kelly Isle out of New Hampshire because she is really on the Benghazi and those kinds of things, and I think we need her voice there. So I really believe those would be the ones I would like. And yes, absolutely, I will support whoever gets our nomination as U.S. Senator.
Okay, Ted, thank you for taking my dream list of people to work with. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I will skip that part because he named everybody I'd thought about, and for almost the exact identical reasons. And I have said this to Claude Pope himself when nobody thought I had a chance in this race, that I would, come May 7th, support whoever is the Republican nominee, and that includes helping our Republican nominee get elected and defeat Kay Hagan, because in the end, that is what matters, is that we take back this seat.
I would find myself aligning with perhaps the likes of Ted Cruz, as I mentioned him earlier tonight. But I also would say to that question, I want to be my own man. I grew up in the area of North Carolina under U.S. Senator Jesse Helms. And Jesse was his own man. He always stood on his convictions, but he always seemed to be able to get the deal done. And as far as supporting the candidate, I say this at every forum we've had, and it is simply this, that honestly, any of us on our worst day will be better than Kay Hagan.
Stole my thunder. I chauffeured Senator Helms and Dot Helms when I was a young lawyer around Davidson County. That night I sat beside him at a speech. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Jimmy?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "When I become a U.S. Senator, I'm not going to be just any U.S. Senator." I said, "Yes, sir." I said to myself, "Senator, you've got about as much chance that Jim Holzhauer does if he pushes your Yes, and John McCain, too. He's a hero.
I'll give you a second or first answer is yes. Ms. Hagan must retire. That's a no-brainer. Number 2, I'm already working right now with Senator Lee and Senator Paul on 10 issues that are going to take to the constitutional message back to more competition. That is what we have to gravitate towards. But I believe everybody's talking about here, we are all men and women. We're looking at to represent who we are as individuals while you're looking at this. And I think that's why it's crucial that we interview for this job, so you know exactly who we are. And I don't understand why Mr. Tillis is afraid or timid to be here. He's interviewing for a job. Unacceptable. We must stand up because we work for you. Let's give a hand again to all our candidates. Thank you very much. Tea parties, Paris, Rowan, and Davidson County. Thanks a lot for coming out to the event. Spend some time mixing with the candidates, and don't forget to vote